Imagine a man standing at the very summit of spiritual authority, a prophet whose name traveled faster than armies whispered with fear and reverence from one desert kingdom to another. This was Balaam. When he blessed, prosperity followed. When he cursed, destruction came. His words did not inspire. They decided survival. Yet, beneath this extraordinary gift lay a fatal weakness. Balaam was dangerously vulnerable to greed. The sacred to him was never fully off limits. It could be negotiated, priced, sold. That is where King Balak enters the story. Terrified by the unstoppable rise of Israel, Balak did not sharpen his swords or fortify his walls. He reached for something far more powerful: gold. He sent the greatest treasure his kingdom could offer, believing wealth could purchase a spiritual weapon capable of canceling the blessing of God. This is not merely an ancient story. It is a disturbing mirror. What happens when a man of God begins to treat divine authority as a transaction? What happens when obedience becomes optional and holiness has a price? Balaam faced a deadly choice: remain faithful and lose everything, or accept the reward and slowly sell his soul. And the most terrifying question is this: how often do we ask God again? Not because we seek truth, but because we hope he will change his answer. The moment the messengers arrived, Balaam understood the weight of what stood before him. They did not come with threats. They came with promises. Gold heavy enough to silence doubt. Honor rich enough to justify compromise. Their words were carefully chosen, but their intent was clear: curse this people and everything you desire can be yours. Balaam did not answer immediately. Outwardly, he appeared cautious, even spiritual. He spoke of consulting the Lord, of seeking divine direction. And that is where the danger began. Because Balaam already knew the answer. God had spoken plainly: do not go, do not curse. These people are blessed. Yet knowledge does not always lead to obedience. Sometimes it becomes something else: a negotiation. That night Balaam prayed, not to discern God's will, but to see if it could be adjusted. His lips formed the right words, but his heart leaned toward Moab, toward influence, toward reward. He did not reject the offer. He delayed it. And in that delay, greed found room to breathe. God's answer was clear and final. Israel was blessed and therefore untouchable. No prophet, no ritual, no amount of gold could rewrite what heaven had spoken. Yet Balaam's refusal was carefully softened. He did not call the mission evil. He did not warn against opposing God. He simply said the Lord would not allow him to go. Truth was spoken, but conviction was absent. Balak heard the hesitation immediately. This was not rejection. It was negotiation. So he raised the offer: more honor, more reward. And Balaam listened. This is how a divided heart is revealed: obedience delayed, faith bargaining for permission. Balaam was no longer asking what was right, only what it would cost to ignore it. Then the invisible world tore through the surface of the road. The angel of the Lord did not appear gently. He stood planted in Balaam's path like a verdict made flesh, a sword drawn gleaming with finality. This was not a warning whispered. This was judgment standing face to face with a man who refused to listen. Death waited inches ahead, and the prophet, renowned for spiritual sight, saw absolutely nothing. The donkey saw everything. She froze as terror seized her body. The blade, the authority, the weight of heaven's opposition pressing down on the road itself. Instinct drove her aside, pulling her rider away from destruction. She saved his life without a word. Balaam answered mercy with violence. Exposed before the princes of Moab, his pride ignited. He struck her hard, not realizing his anger was aimed at grace itself. The road tightened. Stone walls closed in. Once again the angel blocked the way, closer now, unavoidable. The donkey pressed against the wall, crushing Balaam's foot. Pain exploded. Humiliation burned. Rage overtook reason. He struck her again, calling obedience rebellion. Then the path collapsed into a narrow choke point. No space, no retreat, no alternative. The angel stood immovable, sword raised, filling the road with the certainty of death. The donkey could go no further. She dropped beneath Balaam, shaking, choosing collapse over slaughter. Balaam lost control. Blinded by fury, he struck her a third time, beating the very creature standing between him and the sword of God. 3 encounters with heaven. 3 mercies mistaken for resistance. 3 blows delivered by a prophet who could pronounce destinies over nations, yet could not recognize the danger in his own soul. This was not God blocking a journey. This was God confronting a heart that refused to stop moving toward ruin. Then the unthinkable happened. The Lord opened the mouth of the donkey. The animal Balaam had beaten in rage suddenly spoke with calm clarity. There was no roar, no spectacle, just a question that cut deeper than any sword. What have I done to you that you have struck me these 3 times? The moment should have shattered Balaam's world. A prophet confronted by a speaking animal should have fallen silent in terror. Instead, Balaam answered. His fury had blinded him beyond reason. He did not marvel. He did not question the miracle. He argued, "You have made a fool of me. If I had a sword in my hand, I would kill you." In that instant, the prophet revealed how far he had fallen. The presence of the supernatural no longer awakened awe. It provoked violence. The donkey answered again, not with emotion, but with logic. "Am I not your donkey? Have I ever treated you this way before?" The question stripped Balaam of every excuse. Even an animal recognized consistency and loyalty. The prophet had none to offer. Then God opened Balaam's eyes. Before Balaam stood the angel of the Lord's sword, still lifted, judgment written across his presence. In an instant the prophet crumbled. Rage vanished. Terror took its place. The angel's voice fell like a verdict from heaven. "Your path is twisted before me." The donkey turned aside and preserved your life. Had she not done so, you would be dead, and she would be spared. The irony was devastating. The man who claimed vision had walked in blindness. The animal he despised had discerned truth. Mercy had spoken through the lowest vessel, while the prophet raced toward destruction. Balaam confessed his sin and offered to turn back. But the moment had already exposed what words could not hide. God was not impressed by Balaam's reputation. He was not moved by his gift. What God required was surrender. The donkey had spoken. The angel had confronted. And Balaam finally understood a truth that would follow him for the rest of his life. Obedience is not measured by spiritual language or prophetic power. It is proven only by a heart that yields completely to God. When Balaam finally stood before King Balak, the tension was unmistakable. Balak had built altars. He had offered sacrifices. He had done everything he believed could bend divine power to his will. All that remained was the curse. "Speak the words," Balak urged. "Finish what I paid for." Balaam stepped aside to seek the Lord, but this time there were no omens to read, no signs to manipulate. The word of God came with unyielding force. When Balaam returned, Balak watched closely, waiting for destruction to fall from the prophet's mouth. Instead, blessing poured out. "How can I curse whom God has not cursed? How can I denounce whom the Lord has not denounced?" The words struck like a hammer. Israel was not merely protected. They were set apart, chosen, uncounted among the nations because they belonged to God alone. Balak recoiled in disbelief. "What have you done to me? I brought you to curse my enemies, and you have blessed them instead." But Balaam could not take the words back. The blessing was not his to control. He was no longer speaking as a negotiator. He was speaking as a vessel. Still desperate, Balak tried again. Another location, another set of sacrifices, Another attempt to shift heaven's perspective. But the second oracle was even more devastating. God is not a man that he should lie. What he has spoken, he will fulfill. I have received a command to bless, and I cannot revoke it. With every word, the truth became clearer. God's blessing is irreversible. No ritual can weaken it. No enemy can cancel it. And no prophet, no matter how compromised, can change what God has already declared. Balak still refused to accept defeat. Fear had hardened into obsession. If one altar had failed, he would build another. If one mountain had disappointed him, he would climb higher. He dragged Balaam to a final summit overlooking the endless sprawl of Israel's camp, convinced that a different angle might finally expose a weakness God had missed. Altars were raised again. Sacrifices burned again. Smoke filled the air. But heaven remained unmoved. This time Balaam did not seek omens. He did not withdraw to negotiate. The Spirit of God seized him without warning, overwhelming every trace of ambition still clinging to his heart. The prophet who once bargained now trembled. What came out of his mouth was no longer controlled. How beautiful are your tents, O Jacob! How glorious your dwellings, O Israel! Balak froze. The words cut deeper than curses ever could. What he feared most, God delighted in. What he tried to destroy, heaven celebrated. Israel was not fragile. They were planted, rooted, protected by a promise no enemy could uproot. Then the vision broke open. Balaam's eyes lifted beyond the present, beyond Moab, beyond his own lifetime. His voice slowed heavy with revelation. I see him, but not now. I behold him, but not near. A star shall come out of Jacob. A scepter shall rise out of Israel. The air itself seemed to tighten. This was not poetry. This was destiny. A king was coming. Not a temporary ruler, but one whose dominion would crush opposition and endure forever. Balak understood instantly. This was not merely failure. It was a sentence. The curse he tried to buy had become a prophecy of his own downfall. Centuries later, the world would feel the weight of these words. Wise men would follow a star to Bethlehem, fulfilling a vision spoken by a prophet who once loved gold too much. God had done what only he can do. He turned resistance into revelation. He turned curses into crowns. And he proved once again that no human scheme can silence what heaven has decreed. Balak dismissed Balaam in anger. There was no honor ceremony, no reward, no farewell blessing. The prophet who had been summoned with gold now walked away empty-handed. To Balak, Balaam had failed. To heaven, something far more tragic was unfolding. Balaam did not return home. The story could have ended there with a humbled prophet walking away wiser and broken. But Balaam's heart was not healed. It was only restrained. He had learned that he could not curse Israel. God had made that impossible. But his desire for reward had not died. It simply adapted. If Israel could not be destroyed by words, perhaps they could be destroyed from within. Scripture later exposes the darkness of Balaam's final choice. He counseled Balak to seduce Israel, to draw them into idolatry and immorality, not through open warfare, but through compromise, through pleasure, through slow erosion of obedience. What curses could not accomplish, temptation could, and it worked. Israel fell, not because God was weak, but because their hearts were divided. Judgment followed. Lives were lost. Balaam had found a way to profit from destruction without ever speaking a curse. This is the final warning of his story. Balaam could hear God's voice. He could speak prophetic truth. He could stand in the presence of angels, and still his love for gain led him into corruption. Spiritual gifts do not protect the heart. Knowledge does not equal obedience. Proximity to holiness does not guarantee faithfulness. Balaam's end was not glorious. He died among God's enemies, remembered not for his prophecy, but for his betrayal. His story stands as a sobering truth. A man can speak for God and still refuse to belong fully to him. The story ends where it began. Not with Balaam, not with Balak, but with the unshakable will of God. Balak tried to purchase a curse and instead financed a prophecy. He believed fear, gold, and persistence could bend heaven. They could not. Every altar he raised only magnified God's sovereignty. Every attempt to resist the blessing only made it louder. The king learned too late that no one fights God and wins. Balaam's story is more personal and more dangerous. He heard God clearly. He spoke truth powerfully. He even stood face to face with heaven's judgment. And still he loved reward more than righteousness. His downfall was not ignorance. It was a divided heart. Talent belonged to God, but loyalty did not. And then there is the donkey, the most unlikely voice in the story. The creature without status, title, or reputation saw what the prophet missed. God used the lowest vessel to correct the highest office, a reminder that authority flows from obedience, not position. This is why the story still confronts us. Because the question has never changed. Will we submit when God's answer threatens our desires? Will we obey when obedience costs us something? Or will we keep asking again, hoping heaven will change its mind? The star rose. The scepter came. Christ reigns. God's blessing stands. It cannot be reversed, negotiated, or destroyed. The only choice left to us is whether we will stand within it or resist it.